He breaks free. Kennedy breaks says, forget the field goal. Win it with a touchdown.
Formation, and that'll do it. Iowa. 23.
An Aggie upset win. And it's good. He got it.
You are listening to The Review on the OSG Sports Podcasting Network.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of The Review. It's the Online Sports Guys College Football Podcast featuring us, the Online Sports Guys, or at least, again, 50% of us this week.
Well, 75, but there's codicil too.
75%. We do have a pre-tape segment from Brother Wilkie, which we'll get to here in just a quick second. And Brother J-Dub, he's on assignment again this week. We hope to have him back with us next week. If you watched or followed what happened this weekend in college football, there's a lot to digest in there. We'll try to go through all of that, bring you the highs and the lows and everything in between. And then toward the end of the show, we'll take a look ahead at what promises to be yet another week in craziness in college football. But then again, John, that's why we love the game.
Yeah. So
he is OSG Nelson. I am OSG Phil. And before we get too deep into what happened this past week, we're going to toss it over to Brother Wilkie, who's going to share his thoughts on what was a rather interesting week in college football.
Thanks, guys. A few thoughts from the week that was in college football. First of all, what a game by Texas A&M as they're in their win over Alabama 41-38 on Jimbo Fisher's 56th birthday. What a birthday present for Coach Fisher. You know, I always thought if there was going to be a former assistant of Nick Saban that was going to be the first to defeat Nick Saban, I always thought it was going to be Jimbo Fisher. One, they're going to play every year. And two, look, Jimbo's been there and done that. He won a national championship at Florida State. He had great teams there. So he knows how to build a program, and he learned from Nick Saban. I always thought that if one coach was going to do that, it was going to be Jimbo Fisher, and he's proved me right with their win Saturday over Texas A&M's win over Alabama. And then Zach Calzada has just etched himself in Texas A&M lore. He's a legend now in College Station after this win, especially after the late fourth quarter knee injury that he suffered going into the tent. And I don't know what kind of miracle medicine Jimbo Fisher had when he walked into the tent, but it obviously worked because Calzada was able to engineer the last drive that put Texas A&M up for good with that last-second field goal.
An Aggie upset win, and it's good. He got it.
Hats off to the Texas A&M Aggies being the one that slays the Alabama Dragon, and now Alabama takes a little bit of a tumble in the AP poll. My second thought is, if you watched college football in the 12 noon TV window yesterday, you saw two classic games. Oklahoma and Texas, Arkansas and Ole Miss. And I'm sure you're wearing out your thumb on the remote trying to keep up with both games, or you're like me and had Oklahoma and Texas on your laptop and Arkansas and Ole Miss on your big screen. What a game by Arkansas quarterback KJ Jefferson. Throwing for 3 touchdowns, rushing for 3 touchdowns, and almost pulling it off in the end with a 2-point conversion. That was intended for Traylon Burks, but
KJ chased. The Rebels hold on.
It didn't get there, and don't fault Sam Pittman for that call. I thought it was an excellent call by Sam Pittman to roll the dice right then and not play an extra period of football. Turned out that Ole Miss made one big play more than Arkansas when Matt Corral hit Braylon Sanders for 68 yards with a minute 7 left. And Matt Corral's performance is going to boost him for the Heisman Trophy race. I think that's that TV performance by Matt Corral will help him get an invite to New York come December. And next, Oklahoma and Texas, and a classic Red River shootout game in Dallas. And this may have topped them all as far as entertainment and just the type of game it was. Look, Oklahoma was down by 3 touchdowns at one time in this game, and Spencer Rattler was pulled for freshman Caleb Williams. But what a performance by Caleb Williams that kind of calmed down the offense, turned down the turnovers, and all of a sudden Oklahoma's offense kind of found itself, especially Kennedy Brooks, rushing for 217 yards and those 2 big touchdowns, especially the one at the end of the game.
He breaks free. Kennedy Brooks says, forget the field goal. Win it with a touchdown.
Again, what a way to end the Red River Shootout. I don't know of a better Red River Shootout game than this one. And I've seen a lot of these games. I even attended a few myself. But Oklahoma's got some questions they need to answer offensively now. They've had some issues on defense all year. But now offensively, is Spencer Rattler the quarterback of this team? I tend to think he is, but Caleb Williams has made his case, pulling off a huge win in a rivalry game. So Lincoln Riley's got some decisions to make, and it'd be interesting to see where Oklahoma moves from here after the OU-Texas game. And finally, 3 feel-good stories right now in college football. First, the Cincinnati Bearcats. They find themselves number 3 in the country now in the AP poll. So now Cincinnati has put that marker up to be that group of 5 team that can get into the playoff. They're going to have to run the table the rest of the way and win their conference championship game and maintain that top 4 status to be able to do that. Well, they're believers now in the Bearcats, and now Cincinnati's going to have to do their end of the bargain. And again, they're going to have to run the table, win the conference championship, and see if they can get in the Final Four. Right now, they're in a great shape. And by the way, they beat Temple 52-3. They've got to put scores like that with the rest of the American throughout their schedule, I think, to be able to maintain that top 4, that Final Four status to get into the playoff. But Cincinnati has put themselves now in a position to do that. And that's all we've asked this entire time when we've talked about the group of 5. The other is Michigan State. They're moving up in the rankings now. And they are the feel-good story of the college football season. They're 10th ranked now. Kenneth Walker is making a case, a late run, if you will, for a Heisman Trophy campaign. He rushed for 232 yards against Rutgers in a 31-13 win of by the Spartans. And he's making a case for him to go to New York and be invited to the Heisman Trophy presentation. The type of year he's having is phenomenal, and it's put Michigan State in a position to win the Big Ten. Most people had him down the bottom, but Mel Tucker's team has really done well this year, and so Michigan State continues to roll. The other is the school where Kenneth Walker transferred from, and that's Wake Forest. My hat's off to Dave Clawson for what he's been doing at Wake. He gets the maximum effort out of all 22 players on the field on offense and defense. They went into Syracuse yesterday and in overtime beat the Orange 40-37. It's always a tough place to play when you're an ACC road opponent. Sam Hartman had a great afternoon for the Demon Deacons, 330 yards and 3 touchdowns. And looking at Wake Forest's schedule, now you go to Army, which was going to be a tough game at West Point in 2 weeks. You get a week off to prepare for that one. And then you host Duke, and then you go to Carolina. Now, North Carolina is having their struggles. Well, now that's really a winnable game for Wake. The showdown game is November 13th. If Serve holds and North Carolina State continues to win, then NC State and Wake may be playing for the division title on November 13th. Or Clemson could get back in the mix. They play Clemson, Wake Forest does, November 20th. So potentially that game could be for the ACC Atlantic. Then they close the season with Boston College. Now, it's going to be problematic for Wake because 4 of their next 6 games are on the road. So if Wake Forest can run the table there, or at least go 5-1 there, well, then they've earned the opportunity to go to Charlotte and play for the ACC title.
Thanks for that, Wilkie. As always, good stuff. Wish you could be here with us. Hopefully, we'll get you a little bit more time next week. I know your schedule is making it kind of challenging when it comes. It's it's really hard, folks, to juggle 4 different people, 4 different schedules, all of whom have life that sometimes get in the way, and still manage to make a podcast. But we love doing it, so we figure it out. We'll make it work. Keep listening because we appreciate it. John, we'll talk about what we saw this week because everything really focused around Alabama losing their game to Texas A&M, didn't it?
Yeah, and now you wonder when all of the different polls come out where Alabama's going to fall. In the AP, they fall to number 5. And
the coaches poll too.
Yeah, and so I think that when you're looking at Alabama, I get a part of me gives Texas A&M's social media team a lot of credit for all of the genius that they have put out there. But part of me also says, okay, great, you just pissed them off. And so now you're probably going to see a very angry Alabama team for the remainder of the regular season. I still think that Georgia will lose to Alabama twice if Alabama does get it out of the SEC West and get to the SEC championship game.
But are they not a flawed Alabama team? There's some big question marks on this defensive unit because they just got absolutely shredded.
Yeah, and you have to give Texas A&M a lot of credit. Zach Calzada, Lanier High School represent. And I think that we've seen in a couple of instances where Alabama has been exposed. And I think that now you have to, instead of sitting there, if you're an Alabama fan, and saying, okay, we're going to just get through the schedule, everything's going to be fine, you now have to take it on a week-by-week basis. You now have to sit there and learn from what happened the previous week, mistakes or successes, and apply them going forward. And so I think that this is probably going to be one of the more interesting challenges that the Alabama coaching staff has had to try to get to the Final Four and then get to the end of the CFP, where we always anticipate them being in the discussion. So I think that when you're shredded the way that you were by Texas A&M, it gives you stuff to work on. And I think also that Nick Saban revels in these situations too.
And this is a Texas A&M team that hasn't exactly been lighting the world on fire so far this season. They were 3-2 going into the game, and really up until this week had shown no signs of life at all on offense.
Mm-hmm.
And Zach Calzada had a great game, but Alabama didn't put a lot of pressure on him, not nearly as much as you've seen in the past. And there's been some injuries, particularly in the linebacking core to the Crimson Tide. And it makes you wonder if that's kind of taken a little bit of a toll as well. The other thing that stuck out to me was late in the game, Alabama had a chance to score a touchdown, got the ball down close to I want to say it was inside right around the 3-yard line with a first down, and then threw the ball.
Yeah.
They didn't try to run the ball in and score. I don't know if that's Bill O'Brien being Bill O'Brien or Coach Saban not sticking his nose in the offense. But when's the last time you saw that?
I know that you went against type in a very what you and I would probably sit here and say is, okay, you've been mashing and gashing Texas A&M's front 7, so go ahead and stick with it, and then you go away from it. I don't know if you want, you're thinking that if you go against type, you're going to surprise them and get into the end zone when you have been doing fine just running the ball and getting what you were getting out of it. Brian Robinson goes 24 for 147, and he's going to have to be the bell cow going forward for Alabama and turn into that Derrick Henry role that we've seen in years past. So one of the other issues for me when it comes to the running game for Alabama, who's going to step up and be that second back that you're used to seeing as Alabama would run the ball down your throat for a full 60 minutes given the chance. Right. Who's going to step up? And does Brian Robinson have the constitution to make sure that he can handle all of these carries for the second half of the schedule? How is his conditioning going to come into play? And, then because of the lack of depth at running back, does Bill O'Brien try to integrate things more with the passing game so you're not grinding Brian Robinson into the ground? It presents an interesting challenge for Bill O'Brien going forward, too.
Yeah, the loss drops Alabama out of number one, needless to say. We mentioned earlier, they dropped down to fifth this week in most of the polls. But the team that replaced them, the Georgia Bulldogs, you got to see them in person this weekend.
Yep.
And by all indications, they put on another defensive show. Yeah, they gave up their second touchdown of the year.
They did.
And they just looked like a solid, well-rounded team, and they beat Auburn seemingly pretty handily, 34-10.
Okay, so here are my takeaways from this game. I think that if you are, and the book is out on Auburn offensively, because when you have a defense like we saw with Georgia gave themselves a choice. Do you take away Tank Bigsby and Jarquez Hunter and force Bo Nix to pass, or do you do the inverse? Georgia chose the former. And looking at the numbers for Auburn rushing, 29 carries, 46 net yards on the day. Mm-hmm. So when you can hold Tank Bigsby to 10 for 28, Jarquez Hunter for 5 for 18, Sean Shivers 4 for 16, and force Wacky Bo Nix to try to beat you, then I think that's a pretty solid formula. And as Bo Nix ends up going 21 to 38 for 217, if you break that down into attempts, and this is me trying to do long division here very, very quickly, you're talking about almost 180 and 48, 220. You're talking high five, roughly 5 3/4 yards per attempt for Bo Nix in this game, 10 per completion, 5 and 5.7, 5.8 per attempt. And so I think that any team in the SEC, specifically in the SEC West, will look at this tape, try to pin Auburn's rushing game in, forcing Bo Nix to beat you. And what we saw,
but hasn't that been the book on them for the last couple of seasons? The talent level there's a difference in the talent level here.
No question. Yeah, no question.
This was more about Georgia imposing, to me at least, it was more about Georgia imposing their will than anything that Auburn tried to do.
And you saw that when Auburn also turned the ball over too many times, couldn't take advantage of situations, and didn't match Georgia's score for score. They got through the first quarter, and it was fairly even. That's the thing, is that you couldn't match Georgia, and so by the time, because of Georgia's depth, you get into the third quarter, and frankly, you get into the second quarter, you saw Georgia turn it into second gear, and then by the time they get to the third quarter and into the fourth quarter, halfway through the third really and into the fourth, pretty much all the way through, you saw the depth of Georgia's running game when you have Zamir White, Kendall Milton, and James Cook.
And
Dejan Edwards and Stetson Bennett on the keeper, which was deadly at one point, the 30-yard keeper to keep a drive alive, to get them toward a score. And when you can just roll out all of these different guys and sit there and have them be a part of your offense, it just wears defenses down. And when Auburn also doesn't have Owen Papo, who didn't start, and then you lose Smoke Monday on a targeting call for the second year in a row in this game, that also tests your depth at defensive back. So a lot of challenges. Really, if you're Auburn or any team going up against Georgia right now, you have to play the perfect game. And Auburn did not do that. And so, like I said, halfway through the third and through the fourth, all of that depth is there for you, and you just, basically just put the pedal down and you're out the door. And also,
what you're describing to me sounds like Georgia has become Alabama in a season where Alabama's not necessarily Alabama.
Well, once again, remember who we're talking about when it comes to coaches. You're talking about Kirby Smart, who learned at the foot of Nick Saban as long as he did. So you're looking at Alabama and Alabama East. So that's kind of what you're looking at here. You're going to have a running game, and you're going to have a way to just kind of squash the clock and get out the door. And so, I don't think Georgia gave up too many secrets. I think that they used their depth to their advantage. They didn't make any mistakes. They got out the door with a 24-point win, and now you're number one.
Indeed. And really, right now, it's them and everybody else. The team that seems to be the choice for number 2 right now, I still have question marks about, but it's hard to argue with the record. That's the Iowa Hawkeyes. You pulled off quite the comeback at home against Penn State.
Yes.
And ended up with a win. They're 6-0. It's hard to argue with the end result right now. I still look at Iowa as a traditional, old school Big Ten, really big, muscular, and slow team that get
just
exposed.
just a bunch of mashers and a bunch of aircraft carriers that are going to try to get the job done for you. Yeah.
That are going to get overrun when they play a team that's almost, if not as big and just as fast and twice as fast.
Yeah.
I could be reading that wrong, but major props to them for coming back. Penn State really had this game under control for a long time, but Sean Clifford gets injured. Penn State's backup quarterback was clearly not up for the task. Taquan Roberson came in and went 7 for 21, 34 yards passing.
Yeah.
Iowa did.
You can't do that at Kinnick. No.
No. I mean, Iowa did enough on offense to get the win. Spencer Petras, 17 for 31, $195, and a couple of touchdowns. Tyler Goodson ran for 88 yards, but really there's nothing offensively that they did that jumped off the table. It's the suffocating defense.
Yeah. And that's what you're looking at from a Kirk Ferentz coach team. That's what he has prided himself on for all of this time. Yes, those 3-2 games, we give him a lot of grief for those 9-7s, those 10-9s, those 3-2s. But when you're Kirk Ferentz and you're Iowa and you can do that and you have the self-knowledge and confidence that you can do something like that. There are going to be games where you just have to sit there and just take all the air out of the balloon, choose your cliche about deflating something. And I know it's $1 in the jar for each one of those that I use, and I'll pay it when I can. But I give Iowa a lot of credit when you're down 20-13 heading into the fourth, and you come back at home and take advantage of the situation, come out with a win. And right now you're 6-0, and I think that this focuses on the first team, the starters for Penn State, and the difference between and the comfort level of a Sean Clifford and a Taquan Roberson versus a defense that we're seeing in Iowa. So no, I give Kirk Ferentz and that group a lot of credit, and I don't anticipate. I think that Penn State will be a part of the discussion. Although right now, I think that Penn State, that Iowa is the one that everybody's going to be looking at out of the West.
Yeah, I think that's almost a foregone conclusion. The Big Ten East a little bit tighter. Penn State taking the loss, but I'm not going to go into detail with Ohio State other than to say that they won, and they won bigly.
66 on Maryland and Mike Loxley. Yeah, move on.
Yeah,
CJ Stroud for 406 and 5.
The Cincinnati Bearcats make an appearance in the top 5. They're at number 3 this point in time. They rolled big. Don't need to really harp too much on that game as well. Another dominating performance for Desmond Ridder. Yep. Cincinnati's a good team. As far as I'm concerned, that's one of your playoff teams. I don't see too many teams that are better than them at this point of the season.
Nope, right there with you.
The game that was a little bit of a surprise, and I don't know how much of it you got to see. I got to see a little bit myself, was the Red River shootout rivalry.
Yeah, well, it was this year. I mean, it definitely was this year. I know that we always were supposed to use the rivalry word, but it was definitely that. And when Texas was up 38-20 at the break and Spencer Rattler gets pulled, there were a lot of folks who were sitting there saying, what, Spencer Rattler isn't a Heisman Trophy candidate anymore? So, he was exposed in this game. And then you see what Casey Thompson comes on and does in that first half. And you think that Texas, is a part of the discussion. But then just the fact that Oklahoma scores 35 points in the second half against Texas, and Kennedy Brooks goes 25 for 217 and 2. There were just some of the numbers really were staggering. Caleb Williams comes in, he goes 16 to 25 for 212 off the bench. So Oklahoma on the day, 662 total yards of offense. Texas,
by the way, the final score is 55 to 48.
48 on a pass on a score later than late, and a run where you're sitting there and you're going, where is the tackling? Where is the tackling here? Apparently the game really was tackling optional. But Texas on the day with their big first half, they finished with 516 total yards of offense. Bijan Robinson went 20 for 137. But like I said, Casey Thompson throwing for 388 to get them to that big start, and just trying to hold on there at the end. But there were just times where that Texas defense, they were absolutely exposed by Caleb Williams and Kennedy Brooks in the receiving corps. And in a game that had a lot of chunk plays, I mean, the game could have been sponsored by Nestle with all of the chunks that were there is in that particular game. But it was a great game. And I know that Wilkie, in discussing Red River and a game that was in the SEC that we'll get into in the second block of the show, obviously his old stomp had two of the best games of the weekend, bar none. But yeah, Red River going for 103 points, or 55 and 48, 55-45 is 100. Yeah, 103 points and 11 billion yards of total offense. Sooners, great. You're 6-0, and you're just outscoring folks. And Texas is now at 4-2 after getting gouged for 35 in the second half. And I think that's the bigger issue that we need to look at here for Texas.
Yeah, I think both teams in this case, I think, are exactly who everybody seems to think that they are. They're not incorrect there. Big win for Michigan on the road at Nebraska. Nebraska put up a good fight there, though. Michigan pulls out the win 32-29. The Wolverines, the Fighting Harbaughs, are 6-0 right now.
I'm not really all that impressed. I'm really not. And I think that they'll get exposed further down the line, possibly by the team to the south that Brother Martin is a bit of a fan of. Nebraska, I give them a boatload of credit, especially after coming off the mat, being down 13-0 at the half and scoring 22 in the third quarter to make a game of it. I know that you could just see, I think Scott Frost was even shown surrender cobraing at one point late in the fourth quarter after Michigan took the lead. But I still think that Michigan will be exposed later on in their schedule.
Yeah, the other undefeated team in the Big Ten right now, Michigan State. Nice win over Rutgers, 31-13. Huge game for Kenneth Walker, 29 carries, 232 and a touchdown. The Spartans I can't tell you that I thought they would really be a top 10 team at this point in the season, but yet here we are.
Yeah, and I think that what we're seeing, even though you look at Rutgers and you know that Greg Schiano is in a rebuild there at Rutgers, I think that what we're seeing in East Lansing is, once again, Mel Tucker being left alone and allowing the program to grow and letting him build it the way that he wants to. And I think
there's your poster child for the transfer portal.
Yeah, and we saw it before portaling became a thing. We saw it at Kansas State with Bill Snyder, where Bill Snyder would go JUCO, and he would bring in folks like Michael Bishop, and you would get those instant results, and you would get to the bowl games that you were looking to get into closer to New Year's Day. Now with portaling, you're seeing it in our first top 20 example is Michigan State, where you're putting 31 on the board and you're just kind of clamping down on Rutgers, going on the road and getting wins that in years past, late in Mark D'Antonio's tenure, you weren't necessarily getting. So I think a big 18-point win for Michigan State. Mel Tucker now 6-0.
Yeah, BYU falls from the ranks of the undefeated. They go down at home. Boise State beats them 26-17. Good one for Boise State. I did not see that coming. BYU had looked pretty good early in the season.
Yeah, up 10-3 after one, and then Boise outscores them, scoring 20 points in the middle two quarters to get the win by 9. And, once again, I didn't know, in these rivalry games that we see, I figured that BYU would get the win. I figured Boise would keep it close. But I did not anticipate this result either. But, when you look at, when you look at the fumbles that BYU had, they had 4 fumbles. They lost 3 of them on the day. 4 turnovers for the Cougars seems to make the difference in this one, where, if you're Hank Bachmeier and you don't throw a pick and your running backs don't fumble the ball and the opposition has 4 turnovers.
All I can think of is Brockmire, the TV show.
Oh, absolutely. No, I'm right there with you. But I think that when you have 4 turnovers and the other guy doesn't, you can take advantage of it, especially in those middle 2 quarters. You get the result that you get. And BYU now 5-1, Boise at 3-3.
Okay, we got to get to this one. It's the game Wilkie talked a little bit about.
A little.
Talk a little bit about here.
A little.
Because it involved 2 teams, 103 points.
Just general crazy
conversion at the end of the game where one coach decided to go for victory.
Yeah.
Ole Miss 52, Arkansas 51.
And see, now here's what we should do.
It was bananas.
That was, absolutely. And there were folks behind me and the boss, Jordan Hare, who were listening to that game as it was going on and ending, especially as it was winding down in the 4th quarter, as the Auburn-Georgia game was starting, and we're getting all those perpetual updates about it. But, I mean, seriously, when you have a 6-score 4th quarter, and you have, I mean, it was calm to start.
How often do 2 teams combine for 41 points in the 4th quarter of a game at any level?
Yeah, really. I mean, and it was calm to start. It was 7-0 Arkansas after 1, and then you end up with 324 yards on the ground for Ole Miss. Matt Corral throwing, and now here's an interesting number for Matt Corral. Matt Corral, 14 of 21 for 287. So that is, you're looking at what,
20 yards of completion.
So you're looking at 20 yards of completion and 13.5 or 14 per attempt, and you end up with 2 rushers over 100 yards. Matt Corral rushes for 94, and then on the flip side, you end up with KJ Jefferson, 25 of 35 for 326 and 3. He did have the 1 interception. Arkansas rushing on the day, 350 yards on the ground. And so I think basically this was just like, okay, you're going to score? Okay, then you're going to score. All right, so you've scored. It's our time. And literally it was going to come down to what was going to happen at the last. And that's my second cliche of the show. So that's another $1. So, it comes down to that decision at the end by Sam Pittman. Do you go for 2 and try to get out of there with a win, or do you go for 1 and work your way through overtime? But I also imagine going into this that when your defense was as gashed as it was, I figure you were also gassed as well. And I'm talking both sides here. It just so happens that Sam Pittman decides, okay, I'm going to try to get out of here. I don't think we can last into an overtime. So you make the decision there, and then what happens. And as it turns out, you don't get the 2-point, and you walk away with a 1-point loss. And so right now, if I was a poller, if I was a member of the poll voting public, I would probably still have both of these teams in that 14-15 range. I would have Ole Miss 1 spot above Arkansas. I wouldn't drop Arkansas too much.
They're roughly the same team.
Yeah, so I would basically have both of these guys at 14 and 15. Just this week, Ole Miss would be on top.
Yeah, without a doubt. Another quick talker in the SEC before we move on to some other stuff. Kentucky with a big win at LSU.
Mm-hmm.
And two immediate quick takeaways out of this game. One is Coach O may be done in Baton Rouge.
Yeah, I'm surprised that he wasn't tarmacked. I really was.
And 2, Kentucky's a pretty darn good football team.
Once again, we talk about portaling, and it's another example of that. When you can bring in a quarterback in Will Levis, and you can bring in a wide receiver in Wandale Robinson, and you see the immediate impact that they have on the offense. Levis, 14 of 17, 145 and 3, but he really didn't need to do a whole lot when Kentucky rushes for 330 yards. Chris Rodriguez Jr., the leading rusher in the SEC going into the game, goes 16 for 147 and a score. And I think that the other element that may solidify Ed Orgeron's future at LSU was in the post game. He addressed Kentucky's rushing game, and he said that he was surprised that and I'm paraphrasing, that he was surprised at their rushing game and how well it was. So to me, that seems like someone who didn't understand the room that he was in. And when you have one of the leading rushers in the conference against an opposition, against you, and you don't quite understand the context there, you've got to sit there and I'm double thinking things here. If I'm LSU, and I'm imagining that they're going to back up the truck to Billy Napier as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I think so. Quick mention and shout out to Wake Forest, an overtime win against Syracuse, 40-37. They remain undefeated and in the driver's seat right now in the ACC. Florida with an easy 42-0 win over Vanderbilt, not worth the time. Going down the list, want to give a shout out to your boys at Florida State. A nice win.
Next.
A good win over North Carolina. They seem to be showing some improvement from week to week.
Next.
You don't agree with me there, do you?
Oh, this win is probably going to solidify Mike Norvell being their coach for this season for the end, and he'll probably not get fired because of wins like this. When you're a 17.5-point dog and you go into Chapel Hill and you come out of there with the win that you did, still not impressed. Still do not think that he should be the head coach. Have not thought that he should be the head coach for quite some time, but it's wins like this that will keep you around.
Yeah, we'll have to agree to disagree there.
Oh, I know. It's like I said, it's
going to take time to build that program. That was
he's had time.
It was a much bigger train wreck than most of the alums would ever care to admit.
For this job, he was not the coach for that job.
And
I will emphasize that.
Improvement's a good thing. They continue to improve. Good on them. Also, real quick, Coastal Carolina remained undefeated. God knows when it was the last time that those guys lost. Big game for Grayson McCall, 18 for 23, 365 and 4 touchdowns. Coastal drops at 52 on a really bad Arkansas State team. And another big win for Arizona State. The Fighting Herm Edwards go to 5-1. They get a nice win, 28-10 over Stanford.
Yeah, that had a little bit of subplot to it because of everything that was being investigated in the offseason leading into the season, and the head coach at Stanford wasn't mincing any words when it came to his
few words.
So he wasn't mincing any words about what he thought about the situation in Tempe, and so there was a little extra chippiness attached to this one. And 5-1 Arizona State right now at number 22. Stanford drops to 3-3 after losing by 18.
And last but not least, and because these two teams should always be mentioned in a last category, the Toilet Bowl game of the week. UConn travels down the road, plays UMass. 0-7 versus now 1-5 because UMass actually won a game.
They did.
They beat UConn 27-13. Nice win for UMass, the Minutemen.
Yes.
Two teams that are really not very good.
Oh, no, they're not. and the thing is that the game was tied at 13, and I thought that would have been the appropriate result. But you had to get, if you wanted to go see this game in Amherst, the lowest ticket price was $26 on the secondary ticket market. Whereas
on TV.
No, and because if you had gone to see UConn and Vanderbilt last week, you could have gotten into Memorial Stadium in Nashville for $6 in some places or $1 in other places. Although
but it was a closer game.
Last second field goal there. So congrats to UMass. I know you're no longer bottom of the barrel in Phil's mind. UConn at 0-7. I know that you are. And good for Ellis Merriweather. Helmet sticker for you. 39 for 171 and 2 in the win. So UMass gets their first win of the year, and UConn definitely bottom of the barrel.
Yeah, the bottom of the barrel mentioned here, by the way, it's our weekly column of the best and worst in college football that drops every Wednesday on theonlinesportsguys.com, where we take a look at the good teams, the bad teams, and everything in between in college football. our version of the top 12 teams in the country. It doesn't always match up with what the pollsters say, but we're not really influenced by a popularity contest, which is exactly what the AP and the coaches poll is. And the bottom of the barrel, that's an easy one. Those teams tend to stand out a little bit, shall we say.
Mm-hmm.
See Con U.
Ain't kidding.
It's always a fun column to write, and we do predictions on that as well, and usually do pretty well, although this week we might have taken a little bit of a hit. Only missed 3 games in the first 2 weeks. That's pretty good.
Yes, it is.
Why don't we say, gentlemen, let's go to halftime here. Time to take a little bit of break. When we come back in the second half of the show, we're going to take a look at what's coming up in the week ahead. All that and a few news, notes, and nuggets and things left unsaid. Make sure you stick around for the second half of the review. This is the review on the OSG Sports Podcasting Network.
The OSG app is up and running on your Android or iPhone. Install the OSG app and listen to our podcasts from college football, soccer, and lacrosse. What are you waiting for? Download the OSG app today.
We know that every driver is different, and a one-size policy does not fit all. That's why Country Financial offers a variety of discounts, so you get the coverage you need and the savings you deserve. From good driver to good student, multi-policy to multi-car, we've got a discount to suit every driver. Call Jason Wright at 678-568-6871 today to see what you could save. On Facebook at Jason Wright Agency, or by phone at 678-568-6871. Discounts vary by state. Policies issued by Country Mutual Insurance Company, Country Preferred Insurance Company, or Country Casualty Insurance Company, Bloomington, Illinois.
If you've been hurt in a car wreck, contact my friend Steve Apolinsky of Apolinsky & Associates. He's been representing individuals for over 30 years throughout Georgia and Alabama. Email him at steve@aa-legal.com or call him 24/7 at 404-377-9191. The initial consultation is free.
We mock what we don't understand.
Yeah.
Thanks for sticking around, folks. You have made it to the second half of the show. This is the review, and we are the Online Sports Guys. This is our weekly college football podcast where we take a look at the week that was and the week ahead. The first half of the show, we covered a lot of ground going through the games over this past weekend, where there were some interesting results. To put
That's a word to use.
We tend to understate here sometimes, and that's definitely a case of me understating just a smidge. We move on to week 7, though, and it's a full schedule, not featuring as many high-profile matchups, but there's a few good ones there. Probably the biggest game of the week. Looks like it's again going to feature the Georgia Bulldogs as they host Kentucky at a primetime game on CBS at 3:30.
Yeah, and I think that this is going to be one of those markers for Mark Stoops. It's like, all right, where are we as a team? And I know that, as a part of the growth in the program that he has been given the trust in there in Lexington, you want these markers. And I think that last week against LSU was one of those markers. And it's like, okay, now we're going into a hostile environment against the number 1 team in the country. How do we respond? And I think that once again, if you're Kentucky, I think that you need to play as perfect a game on offense as possible. I think you need to eat the clock as much as you can, have those drives that go 7 or 8 minutes that take up a lot of time. You can't have as many 3s as you do 7s, and you've got to make sure that you get turnovers from Georgia, something that they don't do a whole lot of, and you have to take advantage of turnovers if you can get them. And right now there's been a lot of ifs this year when it comes to Georgia, and a lot of teams that have played Georgia have found out that those ifs have turned out to, well, that didn't happen, did it?
Yeah, I'm really interested to see this game. The Wildcats are a team that seems to like to really slow the pace down. To use basketball term a little bit, they kind of go a little 4 corners with a running game, and Georgia, even though they've got that big powerhouse running game with like 5 or 6 deep at running back, they still can open it up and go. Ladd McConkey has been a revelation for them this season.
North Murray High School, the Mountaineers represent.
The kid was barely recruited. All of a sudden, he's finding himself in a starting role at Georgia and has absolutely excelled. Had a huge game against Auburn. I like that. I don't see Kentucky as being a team that matches up that well with Georgia, but we'll have to see how that goes. The only other game really featuring two teams that are currently ranked is Oklahoma State and Texas. And I'm really more interested in seeing what Oklahoma State has than I am seeing what Texas has, because I think we know what Texas has.
Yeah, a lot of defensive issues and the capability to score a lot of points. Can Oklahoma – I mean, I think that once again, whatever the total is, whenever we get to that point, I think that you've got to be looking at the over. And the over in the game at Red River happened early third quarter. Would not surprise me if this was a game that ended up with a total in the 80s.
I don't know. Oklahoma State's been very strong on defense this year.
Well,
they're not playing like a traditional Big 12 team. The most points they've given up in a game this year is 23 against Tulsa. I could be reading that wrong, but they seem.
No, I mean you're looking at past results, and I look at these rivalry games that you see from the old Southwest Conference.
Big 12 was a shootout conference.
Yeah, and so I think that what we saw with Oklahoma and Texas, I think for me is a precursor with Oklahoma State and Texas. So that's how I'm looking at this one. So it'll be interesting to see. And by the way, if you act right now on the secondary ticket market, tickets as low as $6 to get in the door at Darrell K. Royal Memorial Stadium there on campus. So. And by comparison, lowest ticket price in the secondary market for Kentucky visiting Georgia, $241 to get in the door.
Yeah, it sounds like the locals may already be bailing out on Texas after two difficult losses.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a game that intrigues me, and I just like the matchup. It's not a traditional Power 5 matchup. It's UCF travels up to Cincinnati to play the Bearcats.
Yeah.
Since we talked about Cincinnati in the first half of the show and how impressive they've been really for the last two seasons, UCF struggled a little bit under Gus Malzahn in his first year down there in Orlando, but they're still a dangerous team.
Mm-hmm.
I think Cincinnati's probably got a solid advantage in this game, but I'm curious to see what happens. They're going to get some primetime or some noon kickoff exposure on ABC for this one on Saturday.
Yeah, and I think that Cincinnati will be a solid favorite. It's probably going to be in the 8 to 9 range in this one. And you know that with a Gus Malzahn coach team, it's going to take a while for the system to get to where he wants it to go. And so I think that, first season at UCF, you're going to see some ups and downs. And if Cincinnati wants to stay in the discussion as a part of the Final Four in the CFP, then they have to win games like this.
Oh, yeah.
And don't be surprised. And you have to win games like this, and you have to win them convincingly. So when you look at the scores, now that Cincinnati and Luke Fickell are inside the top 4, I want to see how well they put the pedal down and how much they put the pedal down. What do the scores look like? Because everyone's going to be looking at an Iowa, and they're going to sit there and say, okay, Big 10, 12, 14. Georgia, yes, the Southeastern Conference. And so Cincinnati, you're the American. So I think Cincinnati, by design, is probably going to have to put up a lot of numbers offensively and have some distance between themselves and their opposition as much as they can get away with for the remainder of the season now that they're inside the top 4.
The old-fashioned college football beauty contest here in front of us.
Mm-hmm.
In what could be a game that might have a big impact on the future of Ed Orgeron at LSU, the Florida Gators traveled to Baton Rouge and a noon kickoff in Death Valley.
Nice. Yeah, and I think, like I said in the first segment, I'm surprised he didn't get tarmacked after the loss in UK, considering how they lost. And it just seemed, honestly, it seemed in the third quarter, as I was listening to the game, and I was going back and forth as I do with whomever is on offense, and I will listen to that broadcast. It seemed, and I'll caveat this by saying I was listening to the UK broadcast at the time. Third quarter, when the game was being put out of reach, LSU looked like they were completely disinterested defensively and didn't want to be there anymore. So when you have that going on, Kentucky puts up the marker that they did, and you have that as your end result. You've got a 500 LSU team facing Florida, who comes in obviously at number 20. I think that if Florida and Emory Jones take care of business here, and they put up a big number again against LSU, I think that this might be it for Ed Orgeron if he ends up with the loss to end up below 500.
So we're saying right now that Orgeron's seat on the coaching Scoville scale is roughly around habanero hot or a little hotter?
Oh, it is habanero. It is 3 Mile Island wing hot for me. And it's I don't know what can be done unless you think that you're just going to go ahead and make sure that you see the season out, because then what do you do with team chemistry and things like that if you dispose of it after? But there probably is a point where it becomes untenable. Are we at that point, perhaps after a loss at home to Florida, that could be convincing? If Dan Mullen puts up, if we talk about putting up numbers, I think that if Dan Mullen has a convincing win in Baton Rouge against LSU, and you have everyone in the athletic administration sitting there and hearing those boos from the number of fans that will have been left in the building if they haven't gone early, then that might be just enough reason to sit there after Game 7 and send Coach Orgeron on his way.
It's hard to believe that 2 years ago he was being celebrated as a national championship football coach, and we're talking about him fighting for his job at this point.
It's just it's almost like Southern Cal, where Southern Cal is they are just afloat right now. It is a lost ship at USC when you lose to Utah to reinforce that, and you're seeing the same thing I think at LSU.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. I think the 2019 team for LSU may have been a confluence of some really good players at the really good time, with some fantastic assistant coaches. I mean, Dave Aranda leaving that defense hasn't been to go take the job at Baylor, and LSU's defense hasn't been the same since.
Yeah,
they've been decent on offense since Joe Brady left in 2019, but they still haven't been the same flashy team. I don't think the talent's there.
Right.
Which is, I can't believe I'm saying that for a school that feasts on 4- and 5-star recruits.
Yeah, but once again, if you have the chance to go to Alabama and play, or you have the chance to go to Georgia and play, as opposed to going to LSU and struggling, then you're going to have folks check out the door and they're going to go to other places.
Any other games that jump off the page here for you, John?
Okay, so let's see. Auburn and Arkansas in Fayetteville, the noon kick there. One of the, I think that is going to be, I think that's the CBS noon kick on Saturday. So that one, how do these two teams respond after what happened last week for both of them?
Arkansas has run a freaking gauntlet for the last 3 weeks.
Yeah, and so that one stands out for me. I'm scanning just as quickly as you have. You have Iowa at Kinnick at 3:30. Purdue is coming to town. Do they have a letdown after the Penn State game? That's another question that I have. You're looking around Miami and North Carolina. How do these two teams respond in the ACC?
Both disappointments so far this year, major disappointments. They were both in the top 10 or 15 teams in the country going into the season, and at least according to the people who proclaim themselves preseason experts, neither one of them have gotten any traction this year.
Yeah, a couple more. Alabama at Mississippi State. That's a 7:00 kick Eastern time in Starkville. Mississippi State, how does Alabama respond after losing the way that they did? Is Mississippi State basically going to get run over for 60 minutes? I think that's going to be an interesting one. One below the radar for everybody, Liberty at Louisiana Monroe. And we're seeing once again what Hugh Freeze is doing. Keep an eye on Malik Willis when it comes to his stock heading to the next level. Also on the board, Ole Miss is heading to Tennessee. Tennessee, the last couple of games, has put up a lot of big numbers offensively. And I figure that once again, Ole Miss and Tennessee, take the over, start with there. That one's on SEC Network at 7:30 Eastern.
We get to see Lane Kiffin going to Neyland Stadium, too.
That is true. You have NC State going to Chestnut Hill to take on Boston College in what could be a trap game at 7:30. Also on the board, looking late, Arizona State and Utah, their 10 o'clock kick. That one is the late game out of the Pac-12, 14 on the 4-letter as well. And Arizona State, with what we've seen from them over the last couple of weeks, going to Utah, going to be an interesting test for Herm Edwards going to Rice-Eccles to take on Utah at 10 o'clock Eastern time. So that's just a couple on the board, and that's just out of FBS, FCS. Last week in the FCS, you had Southern Illinois knocking off South Dakota State in overtime, 8-2, and they did that on the road. So there's a lot of madness going on around in the FCS. And a shout out to J-Dub and his Campbell Camels as they beat Gardner Webb in the first ever barbecue bowl, Alabama barbecue versus North Carolina barbecue. Campbell comes out on top with the win. So great for the Campbell Camels this past week as well.
I got to ask you a question. I don't know if you've seen this article or not. CBSSports.com writer Dennis Dodd posted something this I guess it was this morning, that the folks with Conference USA are trying to push a concept to the group of 5 teams to reorganize and regionalize.
No. That's not going to happen.
Obviously the conference, the reason they want to do this is in the name of not getting rated by each other as we sit here in the midst of galactic realignment of the conferences for the second time in the last 8 years. Just a flat no on that.
Nope.
Interesting.
Why if I am one of, if I'm looking out for my own best interests when it comes to building a business, why should I pin myself in to regionalization? Think about your favorite restaurants. Think about your favorite chains. If you're In and Out, as an example, you know that you're basically you're a Pacific time zone or a Texas-based chain, because that's what your limitations are, and that's what you choose your limitations to be.
And so regionalization.
Right, but you don't see In and Out overly expanding to sit there and say, yeah, let's put something in Minnesota, let's put something in Ohio. It doesn't fit their geography, it doesn't fit their footprint, and it doesn't fit their approach.
But that's what the group of 5 programs or conferences have done. I mean, look at the ACT spread across half of the country. Same with Conference USA, stretching from the deep Northeast all the way down into the Southwest.
Yeah. What they're doing is they're looking at their franchises. They're looking at their franchising opportunities, and if they can sit there and see, if they perceive themselves to be like, pick your favorite hamburger joint, then you're not just going to pin yourself into one particular section of the country. You're going to expand and do what's best for business. There are those that will sit there and say, no, I think this is a good fit for me. But I think in their own best interest of building their businesses, you're seeing, the ACT do what they're doing, and the Mountain West will always be the Mountain West. Mm-hmm. They might try to move a time zone over to try to get some folks who are stragglers or FCSs if they want to try to get up. But there are those conferences who have those marquee programs that they think can give them that shot for the national idea. Let's take Cincinnati as the bellwether of this discussion. If you're the AC, what's the best thing that can happen for you as we're heading toward galactic realignment? Cincinnati getting into the CFP. So what you can do is sit there and go, okay, we have a team that is a part of our galactic footprint. If you want to be a part of this, see what Cincinnati's doing, you could be a part of this too. And so I don't think that regionalization for those larger Go Fives is going to be something that they're going to want. They're going to want to try to get the best franchises that are the best programs, the best businesses to help their businesses continue to grow. And I don't think that regionalization, I think probably if we were having this discussion 20 years ago, I think that regionalization would have made more sense as you're looking at the landscape. But I think that these conferences are looking at what's best for business. And if what's best for business is having everything from Florida to Texas and all points in between, then that's what they're going to do.
Yeah, and it's interesting because reading through it already, the AC and the Sun Belt have said, no, we're not interested, but thanks for asking. Have a great day.
Yeah, have a great day. We've got a damn fine conference. Have a great day.
But it's an interesting theory, at least to me, because
and it and if I'm looking at it, I would wonder, okay, who could best fit my ideal for regionalization? But then you have the AC and the Sun Belt and all those and Confusa. They would all be chasing after each other, and they would all be consuming themselves. And so instead of doing that,
what's going on here.
Yeah, and so what you're seeing is the branching out and trying to figure out, okay, what's best for us, and then if it means we go out of our footprint to do something, then that's what they'll do. But I think that in Galactic Realignment 2.0, you probably will have some of the Go Fives kind of poaching from each other and sitting there and saying, okay, we like you, we like you, we like you. And I think it's twofold. If geography ends up being a part of it, that's great. But I think they're also looking at it from a standpoint of what's best for business. And if it means grabbing someone from a conference, even though it's outside of your footprint, then more power to you.
Yeah, I think at this point, they're just looking for any way to bring in some extra revenue because of the disparity in TV money payout between them and the big boys. And I know there's a lot of people that say, well, that's why they're the big boys and the other guys aren't. Yeah, but the only way you're going to ever even the playing field is we even out how much money each team gets. That's not what we're looking at here, because right now in the wild, lawless West that is college football, there is nobody to oversee things and say, okay, we're going to pay this out lump sum. Each team gets this amount of money. That ain't going to happen because you can't get 10 of these teams to. You couldn't get two conferences, never mind 10 teams, to sit in a room and say, yeah, I agree, everybody should get paid out equally so that evens the playing field.
Nope. I want mine, and you can't have mine.
Yeah. Everybody's greedy. Everybody wants theirs, and then they want yours too. And that's unfortunately the college football world in which we currently live. And to be honest with you, the way things are unfolding, at least in my opinion, I think it's going to get worse before it ggets better.
Right,
until somebody steps up and finds a way to kind of even level the playing field, you're going to have what we've had over the last 10 years, which is some combination of Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, Oklahoma, those teams competing for the championship with an occasional appearance by an LSU or a Florida or somebody like that.
But you'll still have those conferences represented. It'll be just a shifting of the shares. Yeah.
Until something changes, that's what we're going to be seeing for the foreseeable future. And with the expansion of the college football playoff now being put on hold due to galactic realignment, this is what we got, folks.
Mm-hmm.
This year, it's kind of settling out. It's at least halfway through. We're at the halfway point of the season, and we kind of have a pretty good idea of who's going to be the teams that are competing for those 4 spots and who's going to be competing for everything else. But this is the exception rather than the rule.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to all be the same faces because we're talking about Cincinnati in the conversation, but at the same time, we're still talking about Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, Oklahoma. The only one that's not in the mix right now that's been in that conversation for the last 10 years is Clemson, because somewhere along the line, Dabo Swinney forgot to recruit depth on offense, but that's a whole separate conversation.
Yeah, that's another podcast here at the network where we go deep diving into things. That's another show.
With all that being said, John, what do you say we wrap things up here?
Why don't we wrap things up here?
We've gone on for a good hour or so. Hopefully we have kept you educated, taught you a little bit about what's going on, given you some insight on the games, last week's games and the coming week's games. This show should drop sometime Monday afternoon, so not much is going to change. Make sure you look out for our Dirty Dozen and Bottom of the Barrel column on Wednesdays. You can find it on our social media channels at OSG Sports for Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. You know the YouTube part if you're watching this at home. Our podcast partner, Spreaker, thank you so much for everything that you've done for us. You can find us on Stitcher, Google Play, the Apple Store, Apple Podcasts, Spotify.
You name it, we're there.
Yes. And don't forget our soccer podcast, Soccer Down Here, featuring Brother John and the esteemed Jason Longshore and a cast of thousands.
Mm-hmm.
All that and more on the OSG Sports app. Download it now. It's free. I think I got all the promos out of the way, didn't I?
Excellent. Nicely done.
Yeah, it took me an hour to get to it, but I did get to it. All right. Enough of us. I need your time back. Enjoy the rest of your week, everybody. We will talk to you again roughly at about the same time next week. So long.